Your eyes don't deceive you. It doesn't matter where in hell the series spawned from, whether it be some money laundering scheme or some crack house that rebranded into an anime studio. If it involves a main character being transported into another world, I'm watching it and I'm ranking it. And by the way, the number that you saw in the thumbnail is from my anime list, and it's also how I'm keeping track of what to watch. So if your favorite show that time I got reincarnated as a stripper pole or some shit is not on the list, that's probably because it's not on my anime list. So let's not waste any more time. What is the worst isekai? Let me just set this up for you right now. Isekai is a genre that is infamous for producing the stinkiest stinkers in recent history. Like, so bad it's funny. How about so bad it cuts off your flow of consciousness for its duration and makes you actively yearn for a side view of Subway Surfers? Yeah, I had to watch almost 200 of these. The point is that pinpointing the worst isekai is bigger than just isekai. It will be among the worst things ever. Something so putrid, so vile that it rivals even the likes of P. Diddy. I think the isekai to clash heads with P. Diddy is objectively Isekai Onsen Paradise. Yes, this actually released this year during the winter season. It just goes to show you that the genre isn't dead. As I already established, there are terrible shits out there within the genre. So what makes this anime so offensively bad? Well, it's because of the fact that this isn't really much of an anime at all. It's pretty much a hentai. With most bad isekai, the very least I could say for all of them is that they have a plot. The quality of that plot, not the point right now, but at least they have a functional forward progression that is clear most of the time. If your idea of forward progression is the main character sweet talking or tricking as many women as possible into stripping down naked and getting in the hot spring with him, that is what we call a hentai. In this isekai, we know that this guy likes hot springs because he tells us, not even in the real world, by the way. He just starts out in the fantasy. We're also told that he just got isekai'd a little bit ago, no biggie. And it seems like the only reason this is an isekai is for him to harass fantasy women because, you know, normal women would be too boring. This happens for 12 episodes. I wish I could say these shows that plummeted to the bottom of the barrel were at least enjoyable to laugh at because they're so bad. But when I see this weirdo ass protagonist do whatever in his power to lure in women to strip and bathe with him, and that be the entire purpose of this show's existence, listen, I don't use the I word. Mostly ever. I'm a black male, okay? Literally the opposite demographic to use this word. But these first couple shows on this list, honest to God, gave me the ick. And if you got me saying that shit, you know it means something. So this is the starting tier that I'm calling probably the worst things ever. So by the way I decided to structure this video is not to make chapters for every single isekai because that would be way too cluttered, but for every tier in the tier list. If you want to spot a specific show you want to see, you could find it in the description. Harem in the Labyrinth of Another World is a different type of hentai. This time there's actually a plot that's kind of trying to exist here. So this is the first one of Sword Art Online's fucked up children because this gooner got stuck in some MMO game, but unlike SAO, which actually has stakes because, you know, dying in the game means dying in real life, Protag doesn't seem concerned at all. He's actually quite pleased with this situation. And the first thing he does, frame one, is a crime against humanity. It's a trope in isekai that genuinely annoys the fuck out of me. He buys slaves. And it utterly dumbfounds me to say this, but unfortunately this is quite the common trope in this genre. Look, there might be people out there that don't understand why this is the worst thing ever, so I just want to clear up some confusion. My problem is not with the fact that slavery is normalized in these medieval worlds. It's the fact that these fucking I said goofy goobers here, by the way. No hate, all peace. Peace and tranquility. It's the fact that these goofy goobers came from the modern era where it's literally regarded as one of the most heinous crimes of humanity ever that makes it so bad. Okay, so as I said before, this shit is prolific, like as prolific as the word the. So what makes this so much worse than all the other shows that do this? He forces himself on them. Yeah. I mean, okay, sure, the women are fine with it. I concede that. What I don't concede is the blatant power dynamic that made it impossible for them to say no. I think we're done here. Astarothe's toy is about a 23-year-old guy that gets isekai'd for the purpose of being employed in a 10-year-old lolly's harem so she can consume his sperm. If you need any more commentary other than that description from me to justify its placement here, find help. I obviously did not finish this show, so why don't we just move on? So, a ton of isekai nowadays end up with a harem, where the protag would happen to just come across several women with multicolored hair who instantly just fall for him on his journey. Well, what if there was a show where the very plot itself revolved around the protagonist dipping his baguette into a rotation of anime women? Listen, you knew this was coming. When you think of isekai, you think of ReZero. When you think of bad isekai, you think of conception. With a title like that, you know you're in for some shit. The anime opens up with a girl telling the blood-related protag that she's pregnant. Then she gets randomly isekai'd to another world where the king guy tells him he needs to do the freaky leaky with his cousin and 12 other random women in order to save the world. Then comes probably my least favorite thing ever since Big Mouth. This horny ass raccoon. Every single conversation that is held with this freaky ass mascot would end up in some sex euphemism. The protagonist could be talking about some food, maybe he's eating some steak or something, and this bitch would be like, enjoy this rest, because later, you're gonna have to administer the hot beef injection, or some shit like that. I mean, compared to the others in this tier so far, this show is actually pretty tame, and it actually is so bad it's funny here and there. In another world with my smartphone. Yeah, you knew it was coming. While the others in this tier offended me on a moral level, these next few offended me on a technical level. I'd make the joke that this feels like some ChatGPT slop, but I actually read a story generated by ChatGPT about some guy who gets teleported to a fantasy world through a skibbity toilet, and that was the fucking Godfather compared to this diarrhea. So this anime starts out with our guy getting blasted, sent to God to be reincarnated, but God actually allows for Guy over here to bring one thing, and Guy chooses his smartphone, of course. Look, this anime isn't this bad because it has some uniquely terrible writing. It's so bad because it looks at and utilizes the standard isekai tropes and manages to make them the worst they could possibly be. It uses the same starting class as everyone else, but managed to make the worst, least optimal build possible. The characters are all flatter than the screen I'm watching this on. The guy over here gets unnecessarily OP through his smartphone in 0.2 microseconds. And this isekai basically relies on the fact that the viewer watches other isekai to understand it. It has the same world as every other isekai to ever exist. The magic system, the adventurers guild, the same side quests, the same everything. This is why I say that isekai are all part of the same cinematic universe. It's stupid, it's dumb, I hate it, goodbye. My instant death magic is so overpowered no one in this world stands a chance against me is the biggest joke in this genre. And not a good joke. The type of joke you say to your group of friends and it's so bad everyone just pretends like nothing happens and move on to the next topic. I watched this entire show. I even made a video on how this is next level garbage, and I never noticed that this was supposed to be a parody until someone in the comments pointed it out. And now that I know that, this shit got 10 times worse. Are you kidding me? This anime is literally about a kid who was granted the power of Light Yagami's Death Note without actually having to write the names down. He just says die, and anyone he wants dies. He doesn't even have to see them to murk them. He could just wallbang too. So with a main character as almighty and powerful as him, where does the story even go? Well, the main character just becomes a serial killer, straight up. This bitch is sadistic. He'll murder his classmates, random Joe schmoes on the street. I mean, I knew the writing was bad. I mean, he just kind of kills for no reason. And obviously the show doesn't have stakes with an ability that OP, but now that I know that this is intended to be funny, this transcends just bad writing. I think the author needs to sober up. I haven't laughed once watching this psychopath go on his murder spree, but there are some times I've laughed at the show, and that's probably because it got one of the worst adaptations ever. I have a conspiracy theory about this show, because this shit can't be looking this bad and not be intentional. I think the studio behind this anime deliberately sabotaged the source material to make for a great fusion dance between some shitty ass source material and one of the worst adaptations to birth something with a strange aura. But where I'm from, We just call that stench. The Master of Ragnarok and Blesser of Einherjar is the apotheosis of incompetence. Just like a ton of other isekai, this anime does a ton of shit terribly. But this show is special. It goes the extra mile in fucking up everything in every possible way. It's truly a case study worth researching. So to describe how this show is so bad, let me go on a quick tangent. The reason so many of these authors just naturally drift to creating isekai stories is because of the sheer advantages its premise gives. Like, if some random pedestrian from like Nebraska were to be transported to the magical land of Enta Isla, that random Nebraskian would be in the same headspace as the audience. Both him and the person behind the screen have no idea about this other world yet. So therefore world building becomes easy, because it wouldn't be unnatural for the protagonist to ask about random fantasy jargon because he doesn't know shit. The aforementioned fuck up I mentioned before with this show has to do with exactly that. Many terrible isekais start out with the protagonist already in his new world, without spending any time in their previous life. But this is next level. We start out in this anime after the protagonist has spent multiple years in this fantasy land, with a starting loadout of obviously OP powers and an established harem. But what got me is that he's the commander of some militia crime syndicate organization, or whatever it is. This decision practically shot the author in the legs. He declared that this was an isekai, proceeded to skip out on the fucking purpose in writing in this genre, and then is forced to world build normally. And obviously he can't do that. Black Summoner looks like it's gonna be the last one to make it as the best of the worst. Instantly getting into the show, it's asking, pleading for me to tear its writing to shreds. It's so obviously flawed, transparently ugly. So what makes it so bad? Well, the first 2 seconds clues us in that the author only made this in isekai so he could probably tag it as such and gain a bigger following. Since no time is spent on this guy's previous life, and the god that reincarnated him already erased his memories, so it doesn't even matter anymore, does it? Well, no matter, we could just look at this as some MMORPG type of fantasy show. So since I suppose the main character is a slice of plain bread, or maybe more accurately a life-size styrofoam statue, I suppose he's incapable of thinking for himself. So thankfully he was given a guide in this unfamiliar world, where he could just take a back seat and let someone else make decisions. Go to the Adventurers Guild? Okay. Take that quest? No problem. Buy that slave? Of course. Okay, I'm being a little silly right now. That last one actually wasn't recommended by the guide. It was his own decision to buy the slave, which admittedly makes things 1,000 times worse. But look, what I'm doing here is a little unfair. We can't just expect a dude who literally has no memories to have a personality or make the best choices. And that's exactly why a show should never do this. Look, as you can see from the sheer stupidity of this video concept, I have no life, but there's a difference between having no life and having infinite time. So finishing every single one of these mid to low tier shows from start to end is just impossible. Okay, maybe not impossible, but I could be doing anything else with my time, like the preferable activity of watching cement dry. So finishing all of this shit is just off the table. But I need to at least watch enough of these series to know where to rank them. So I've placed the hopefully uncontroversial 3-episode rule, but only for this tier and maybe the next few. For the better stuff where I can actually sink my teeth into what I'm watching, of course I'll finish it. For now though, honest to God, I'd rather shit on my hands and give a round of applause than finish these. And that's exactly what this tier is called. Skeleton Knight in Another World, frame 1 kicks off with the type of scene that has the specific combination of the words race and ape. I don't know if the studio was sitting around a table thinking of ways to hook the viewer in, and then that one guy stuck his finger in the air and proudly declared that they should start out the show with the most deplorable crime humanity has ever engaged in. Although I suppose that this scene does set the tone of some sort of edgy, dark fantasy isekai, and other great shows have done it. I'm pretty sure Berserk did it, although I'm not sure if that was consensual. I don't really know. So we are introduced to the skeleton guy who has basically a non-existent reaction to getting isekai. He's just like, what's going on? Oh, this is just like one of my favorite games. It's so unsettling and frankly jarring how laid back and carefree this guy is after the viewers were exposed to violent sexual crimes. This is a conflict of tone in its most obvious form. There are people literally getting brutalized and this fucker is just like, oh shit, this skill's sick. It's just like in my game. Overall, this show is directionless, confused on what it wants to be, and most importantly, boring. Combatants Will Be Dispatched isn't any percent speedrun. It's a no bullshit run that's successful in making me utterly despise the main character in under 30 seconds. I swear to God, they just had a checklist going into the show. Bad jokes, laughing about an action that happens to rhyme with grape, and a persistent ass attitude that makes me want him dead. Immediately as the show starts, we are introduced to a futuristic Earth where the planet has been taken over by one big mega corporation. And then the representatives of that organization are giving a speech to this fucking troglodyte about how his mission is to scout other planets. And he's like, what do your parents think of your tacky roleplay and corny titles? So like, is this actually a world-conquering organization or just some reason these weebs cosplay? We don't know. This show is so stupid. They give us a serious-ass exposition dump, then immediately contradict all of that with this absolute waste of skin. Too bad the other world actually had some good potential with interesting lore, because the writing is garbage and the characters are worse. Girls Bravo sucks dick. Yeah. It's about a guy who gets bullied and abused by a woman. Then he teleports to a world where way less men exist than women. You could fill in the gaps on what happens next. This show is just shit. Literally has no value on this planet. Just watch porn at this point. There's no point. Aesthetica of a rogue hero honestly just feels like pre-game for a goon session. All the women have inflated chest sizes, of course, with a lolly exception. And every single character in this show is about as interesting as a potato or a rock. Actually, not to insult rocks, a lot of them are pretty cool. It feels like the only purpose any character serves in this show is if they're a female, getting groped by the main character, and if it's a male, serving as an example for how badass the main character is. The plot is basically that this guy served as a hero in another world and did his duty, then when he came back to Earth, he brings back the Demon Lord's daughter and makes her pose as his little sister, and they both join a magic high school. If there was any human being who has read this synopsis or heard me just tell it to you and then went on to actually watch this show, well you gotta be either 12 years old or just someone different. Maybe you're built different. Who knows? Maybe I can't comprehend you. Fruit of Evolution, before I knew my life had it made? Doesn't seem very grammatically correct. Okay, this show is about some chubby loser that gets teleported to a different world, blah blah blah. Then when he gets there, he can level up through various means, and eventually he will acquire a Fruit of Evolution, which literally just makes him less chubby and less of a loser. Okay, so Protag comes across some pink gorilla who, well, professes his love for him after trying to kill him, and the thing that surprised me is that the Protag actually accepted its love. And after this, I got my hopes up, just by the tiniest, smallest microscopic amount, because this could turn out to be something that's pretty thematically cool. Like, this loser guy who was bullied for being fat learns to befriend someone who also isn't conventionally attractive as well. But the gorilla and the protagonist relationship really disappointed me. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely support mixed couples. Okay, maybe I went too far with that one. Well, to nobody's surprise, the gorilla transformed into a big-breasted anime woman who has no personality except for wanting to slime the main character's banana. Oh, and also apparently people who actually watched the season 2 for this show for some reason have gone on record saying that it got the Promised Netherland season 2 treatment, which if you don't know, the Promised Netherland from season 1 to 2 went from a goat to something that could barely even be called a narrative, with how many skips and plot holes and plot twists that never even occurred in the manga that it had. So if this isekai got that treatment, that just makes me confused. Did it go from a 4 out of 10 to a negative 16 out of 10? Honestly makes me kind of curious now. High school prodigies have it easy even in another world has a stupid premise and even worse execution. It's about 6 prodigies that get isekai'd into another world, and these 6 all have special talents and abilities, hence the title of the show. But it's clear that the talents that these prodigies have basically just is their character. In this show, functionality was replaced with personality. And throughout the entire show, the 6 of them just wander out, and if someone has a problem, one of them just pulls out the answer out of their ass because, you know, they're prodigies. If you're trying to write smart characters, you should at least be smart yourself, because this has some of the laziest conflict solution arcs, even compared with other isekai. Truly terrible stuff. My isekai life, I gained a 2nd character class and became the strongest sage in the world, is a lobotomy in real time. Overpowered non-talkative main character who's not afraid to show off from episode 1. Every single issue or problem gets solved effortlessly by this guy, and there's no sense that the protagonist could ever be in danger. The writing is generative AI, the characters have nothing interesting or redeeming to them, and the plot is just there to show off the main character's busted omnipotent power, because that's all this anime is. It's for people to self-insert into this cardboard cutout and feel like they're the protagonist who can do everything. Summoned to another world a 2nd time is a lobotomy in real time. Overpowered non-talkative main character who's not afraid to show off from episode 1. Every single issue or problem gets solved effortlessly by this guy, and there's no sense that the protagonist could ever be in danger. The writing is generative AI, the characters have nothing interesting or redeeming to them, and the plot is just there to show off the main character's busted omnipotent powers. But that's all this anime is. It's for people to self-insert into this cardboard cutout and feel like they're the protagonist who could do anything. Am I actually the strongest is something I was honestly gonna continue the bit for, because don't get me wrong, these shows are all the same thing. But this one actually made me burst out in laughter for one scene. When the protagonist was so OP, he could lift entire fucking land masses and rip the fabric of the universe open as a fucking baby. My unique skill still makes me OP even at level 1, destroys its gimmick within milliseconds. The MC spawns in as a slime drop, which is actually kind of funny, but the gimmick is that he starts out at level 1 out of 1. Then immediately his skill or whatever allows him to transcend the power of even the god of strength, apparently. Then randomly he just gets a gun, then just starts shooting shit in a world that's supposed to be medieval. I don't even know why I'm still talking about this. Let's just move on. I gained the cheat skill in another world and became unrivaled in the real world is insultingly bad. So we got an admittedly sad sob story about how our main character's appearance and shape subjected him to non-stop bullying. But after gaining access to another world and leveling up and shit, he changes his appearance. And now he's like this sex god that the show makes certain we understand that every woman who takes a glance at him instantaneously turns into an uncontrollable waterfall in their lower body. So then this guy returns to high school, and of course we get everyone's utter shock that he's basically a different human being. Although you might think that the point of this show is to offer commentary on how looks and just external factors as a whole are treated in society, but in reality it's just an escapist where the ugly guy gets all the attention in women. If you want to watch something like this, just watch Lookism. She professed herself pupil of the wise man, taught me a crucial life lesson. I only watched 1 episode of this, and I know I broke my promise to watch 3 episodes literally 2 seconds after making it, but watching this gave me a whole new perspective. After thinking it over post-enlightenment, I think in general, a 1 episode rule is valid. Since obviously in that first episode, they want people to keep watching, so they'd pull out all the stops. I guarantee you that the first episode of a show, or even the first couple minutes of a movie, have way more budget put into it, more thought, and more quality writing than the rest of the duration. So if I know that this show is a 4 out of 10 on the first episode, it'll probably turn out to be a 3 or 2 out of 10 overall. The reason people usually stick with the 3 episode rule is because a lot of the time, that's how long shows sometimes take to develop its premise. Although, out of all things that matter in judging the quality of a show, the premise probably matters the least. This show starts out with a monotone, boring exposition dump about some MMORPG game, and as the narrator was persuasively convincing me to hate this show, there were these ugly, generic-looking D&D monsters in the background, and also what I could only describe as the stock footage of anime. Every fight in this anime is 1 FPM, frame per minute, and the anime budget is to the point where even making lips flap is a Herculean task, it seems like. When we get introduced to our main character, he instantly starts giving an exposition dump. This is bad on like a technical level for sure, and also just on a normal level. I mean, dude gets turned into a little girl. I hate that shit. But this is not offensively bad. And it never really applied itself and really put in the work to be the best at being the worst, like the shows below have. Ixion Saga might be the most ugly anime I have ever watched. Of course, you have your X arms and your handshakers, but those are fun ugly. Or fugly. Like, those animes are a special type of fun bad. It's like a how do they think this is a good idea bad. Ixion Saga, on the other hand, makes you want to grab the nearest highly acidic domestic chemical, most preferably bleach, and drench that shit down your eyeballs. There is no excuse for anything looking this bad. God had no hand in the creation of this abomination. Imagine you go through 4 years of university to finish your animation major for this freshly shot dookie to be the one show in your portfolio, so you never get hired again. The story is also mid, so a mid story with an even worse adaptation makes for the second to worst tier. The story of a man that turned into a pig is disgusting inside and out. This guy gets reincarnated as a pig, and I'm already turned off because pigs are just gross to me. But then it turns out that the person that's inhabiting the body of that pig might be more gross than the actual pig. In the first scene, he's blowing his load over the fact that he might be getting touched by a high school girl. Like, it's just an unpleasant watch. Just don't do it. Scumbag System is a Chinese isekai that I'm honestly kind of racist toward. Like the type where I judge it based on the color of its skin and not the content of its character. The show is pretty interesting though. Like the main character dies by eating and choking on a rice cake. Insert another Chinese food that it might be. And then he dies while reading some web novel about a Chinese noble from a while ago and his scumbag master who will eventually betray him. And surprise, the protagonist gets reincarnated into the body of that scumbag master. And it's cool, but there's an elephant in the room that is begging to be addressed. I don't like to look at this show. It puts strain on my eyeballs to watch this. I admit I'm completely racist against full CG shows that aren't B-stars. I, honest to God, could not finish this. End Ride is next. Literally the only reason it's so far down here is that more than anything, it's just boring. I was literally reading some manga in the background while watching this shit. The characters are all one-dimensional losers. The animation is abominable. The plot is garbage. Everything that happens in the show is stupid. Okay, I admit I'm a huge hater for this shit, but it's justified. Trust, just trust. Believe me. Other Side Picnic is about a duo of girls who have the ability to make contact and step into the other world, which has some crazy monsters in them. Something felt off here though. At first I thought maybe it was the animation, which was bad, really bad. It would do the shit that Blue Lock does where it'd have one shot that's 2D, then when they'd have a zoom out shot, it becomes like some Play-Doh looking at CGI, probably thinking we wouldn't notice it. But compared to Blue Lock, the 2D animation is subpar at best. But I think the greater issue is the direction of the show. Something felt off. I later found out by people who read the novel of the show that the anime adaptation did a complete genre switch from the original, which went from a supernatural horror to a slice of life rom-com. So yeah, if you want anything to do with Other Side Picnic, just consume it in the form that isn't anime. Dead March to the Parallel World Rhapsody is the result of true genius working at its best. Because in this anime, none of the harem women have big boobs. Yeah, that's it. The rest of the show is not good. Our main character is actually kind of an interesting fellow before he gets reincarnated. I can't even lie. I kind of got sucked into his story a little bit too. He's a programmer that is grossly overworked because he's doing game development on a game that's about to be released. He's very relatable since I'm a seasoned coder with 2+ years of experience. And it's very interesting to see because we know that Japanese people as a whole are overworked, but we also know that in general, video game devs are under colossal pressure when deadlines are coming. So when you combine these two worlds, we get these foul, tarnished souls staying awake for 30 straight hours writing lines of code. So when he gets transported to escape his fantasy world, that's where I immediately get sucked out, since he OP as fuck, but mostly because he has absolutely no direction in this world, or goals at all. He's basically just dragging his fucking enslaved lollies around while completing side quests. And yeah, that's why the shit is so low. The New Gate is an incredibly confused show. It starts out as the most shameless Sword Art Online ripoff I've ever seen. But whatever, I guess at least it'll have a plot and stakes to go with it because they describe it as a death game. But then it just turns into a bumfuck generic ass isekai. Basically, this Kirito wannabe beat the final boss of the VR world, which I guess was also somehow responsible for trapping everyone in the game, because when he beats it, everyone can finally log off. Although as everyone logs off, he stays. I guess because nice guys finish last, I don't know. Then he suddenly gets sucked into a portal and teleported to the same game world, but it's not a game anymore. You see what I'm saying when I say this show is confused? It attempts to mash completely separate premises together, and the result of this experiment is two completely shattered premises where I honestly don't even know what the point of the show is. Like, yeah, sure, cool, when it was a death game for T-minus 30 seconds, everyone was just trying to survive. But in contrast, now we have this mild-ass isekai where the protagonist has no direction and no adversity since he's OP, of course. So he does the one thing that would obviously make sense to do in this kind of development. He joins the Adventurers Guild and does side quests. Yeah, I didn't finish this one. Isekai Cheat Magician does everything badly. And you probably don't need me to tell you that because you don't even need the 3-episode rule here. If any sane person sees this title, they should run for the hills. Actually, you know what? I think I actually find those new gen isekai titles really helpful. It helps me quickly identify the trash among the less stinky trash, I guess. As you could probably tell, the main character reincarnates, instantly gets the most OP power beyond normal comprehension, and the show from start to end has no stakes whatsoever because bitches be too powerful to struggle. And the problem with being overpowered right at the start isn't just lack of adversity, by the way, since if they start out with an infinite arsenal of magic they can use, there's no chance in hell that the magic system is getting fleshed out at all. If Gon had crazy Nen in Hunter x Hunter by episode 1, then I doubt that there would be any chances to explain Nen to the audience. And to be honest, that's one of my favorite parts about fantasy shows in general. Very bad, don't watch. Wise Man's Grandchild is a hate pick. This show put me to sleep at least 5 times, and not even because it was 3 a.m. since I literally tried to watch this one on like 3 separate occasions, and every single time this shit squarely knocked me out of consciousness with how fucking boring it is. Wise Man's Grandchild is uniquely bad because of how pacifying it is and generic. Like, this show is the epitome of those videos like mysterious nonchalant main character pretends to be weak but reveals his overwhelming power at Magic High School. World's Finest Assassin gets reincarnated into another world as an aristocrat is made by the same person who made Redo of a Healer, which is so infamous that I probably don't need to give it an introduction, but I'll just leave you with the fact that if it was actually classified as an isekai, you would have heard me talk about it first. Although this isekai is just okay. It doesn't seem to have any of the psychopathic traces that you'd think would be left behind by the Redo of a Healer guy. This anime is about the world's finest assassin that gets reincarnated into another world as an aristocrat. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to do that bit at least once. It's about this level 99 assassin who's requested by a goddess after he dies to kill the main hero of this fantasy world. By this premise, it actually seems like a very fun time and also has a lot of potential. In episode 7, the reincarnated middle-aged man is sharing a bed with 2 children for some reason. One is a childhood friend slash servant he once saved from animals, and the other is a former captive of a sex trafficking ring, posing as his sister. When they wake up in the morning, the 2 girls smell the main character's ejaculate after he has a wet dream, and the 2 girls offer to take care of it for him the next time, lest he become too pent up. In the following episode, the girls have told the mother about this for some reason. She enters her teenage son's bedroom early in the morning because she wants to see it, and alludes that she's disappointed that it hasn't happened again. I think out of that whole story, the most outrageous aspect is the fact that they smelt his ejaculate. Like, are you a dog? Is that one of your superpowers you have as a resident harem member? to fucking sense your master's ejaculate? These bitches be crazy. I think I've made this case for why this deserves to be here. Arifureta catches the title of the edgiest wannabe dark and gritty isekai, and probably one of the biggest disappointments I've had in the genre. Not because I was hyped for it or anything, but because other people were, and that made me hyped for it by association. Since this light novel apparently is one of the more popular ones out there. But the adaptation turned out like this. Although it's not just the adaptation, the source material is definitely also to blame. Like, they unironically have the Tokyo Ghoul edge transformation from black to white hair. But the real reason this anime is here is because it's insanely cringe. Kaneki's transformation in Tokyo Ghoul is kind of metal, I'm not even gonna lie. But when it happens in this show, he transforms from a guy that really sucks at killing the offensively ugly CGI monsters to a guy who is slightly better at killing the ugly CGI monsters. I don't know what else to say. Maybe I would like this if I was 12. Okay, 9 years old. Next up is Do You Love Your Mom in her 2-hit multi-target attacks. This isekai is, well, kind of just sucks. I genuinely think the only redeeming thing even the author himself can probably find in this shit is the mom and like sexualizing her and shit. Listen, I'm a degenerate, but not that kind of degenerate. If your only thing about your show is a 4-year-old woman making pouting faces, I think I'll pass. Also, what's weird is the fact that usually in bad isekai, even if it's a real fantasy world with living people inside of it, the protagonist would sometimes be a super ass because they treat it as a video game world. But here, the people in the fantasy treat it as a video game also. It's mind-boggling. So now we head into by far the tier with the longest list of shows on it. We have the mid-tier. So bear with me, we're gonna go way faster than before, just because in all honesty, there isn't much to say about these shows. So I'll probably just crack a joke, say 1 or 2 things about it, and then move on. Monster Rancher is about kids that get trapped in a game called Monster Rancher. I honestly smelt the Digimon bootleg from a mile away, even though I'm not even much of a Digimon fan. Why would anyone watch this over Digimon? There's no reason. Except for this absolutely life-changing opening.
I was transported to a faraway land, into a world where monsters rule.
The Great Cleric is something that literally does not do or accomplish anything that is not completely redundant for this genre. It's literally about a guy who gets reincarnated as a healer when healers are a rare breed of magic users that are usually corrupt scammers. And while I appreciate the American healthcare allegory, the writing is just okay and the pacing is slow. Don't get me wrong, I love slow-paced stuff, but this is just painfully slow. The Executioner in Her Way of Life is a prime example of how you can't win on premise alone. This show takes place in a fantasy world that has been summoning Japanese people for a long time now. So long that even the language of Japanese is widely spoken. So this kid is summoned, finds out he has no powers, then gets kicked out of the castle with no guidance. Then he meets up with this priestess girl who explains a couple things about this world to him. Then the boy finds out that he doesn't have nothing as his power, but he actually has the power to reduce anything to nothing. Then the priestess stabs him through the neck. I gotta admit, this takes some balls to do. I mean, to just completely do a main character swap is insane, and at this point, the show had my attention. But as this girl kept opening her mouth and the show went on for longer and longer, I am convinced that this is the biggest fumble in the genre. These authors know how to come up with gimmicks and twists, but they don't understand the first thing about writing an actual story that isn't just vomited up. The main character, who's this girl now, basically just acts as a mouthpiece to give whatever exposition dump is necessary. This show is edgy, and that's fine, but we're never given full justification on why they need to kill the otherworlders. I mean, they're just innocent people who sometimes lose control of their unique abilities. There are certainly other ways to have them not blow up, and these guys are like priests and clerics and shit, like they should be good. Then the rest of the show just tries to keep our attention by spamming scenes that are just shock value. Don't get fooled by the show, it's It's not good. I Shall Survive using potions is something I really had a hard time watching, mostly because of the art style. Like, why does this grown-ass working woman need to be drawn like a child? And every other member of the main cast has the same look to them. This show is just weird. The main character is annoying, the gimmick is stupid. Goodbye, have a nice day. Aruta the Legend is a show that I really don't have much to say about. It's an old show where the isekai tag comes from the plot of the main character switching places with a person from another world. Although no characters and no plot point ever stuck out to me at all. And in the end, it's kind of just a nothing burger. Mayor Chin is what you'd find after dumpster diving and excavating the piece of shit that was at the bottom. The show is truly underground. Yeah, that's it. It's not good underground, it's just terrible. Sometimes you do find hidden gems, but for the most part, shows are buried for a reason. Battle Girl Time Paradox is about magical girls representing important historical figures that get summoned. It's overly fan servicey, the characters all feel flat, and why would you ever watch this? Just watch Fate. No, this show has no point. I'm Standing on a Million Lives is a pretty unique story, but how it's handled is a little bit questionable. So it's about this game that teleports high schoolers into this world to complete quests once a day, and if they don't complete these quests, they die. The difference between this and most isekai is that this is actually a game world, with non-player characters and skill trees and shit. This show, however, feels very rushed, and after everything is said and done, it turns out to be a pretty generic plot. Knights in Magic gotta have the most boring world, most boring protagonist, as you can see, the most boring title. Bro dies by a truck. Reincarnates into this world, and then he wants to pilot the mech guy, and then Sasuke and Peeps is a messy show. The plot starts out with this normal looking businessman who adopts a raven for some reason, and then that raven turns out to be a famous wizard from another world that gives him the ability to cross between worlds. So Sasuke begins making bank from selling earth stuff to a medieval consumer base. Then Sasuke saves this one girl, and then that girl turns out to be the chief of a government organization that keeps tabs on gifted people with special abilities, and then they recruit him into the agency to track down others like him. Then a war in the other world breaks out and he's swept up in it. There's just so much shit that is going on in this show, and that this show is trying to accomplish, although there is never any effort put into connecting all of these incredibly varied premises, and in the end it just completely falls apart. Demon Lord Retry is just Timu Overlord. There is just nothing good or original to it. Everything it does, others have done 20 times better. So guy coded a game, gets reincarnated into game in the form of Demon Lord. Then for the whole show, this guy just aimlessly wanders, fighting strong opponents and winning effortlessly, just so they could praise him. Don't watch this, just wait 50 minutes and I'll tell you what to watch. Drugstore in Another World is what you expect from the title. No, they aren't building the drugstore from scratch or any of that boring shit. The show starts after this guy isekai'd into this world, built and made a career out of this potion shop, and met 2 members of his harem already. The show is just a slice of life of this guy in a drugstore with his lolly harem. Only anime fans would give this a 6.46 rating out of 10. That shit's unbelievable. The 8th Son, Are You Kidding Me? Starts out when this boy reincarnates as a child of nobility, but then he realizes that the noble family is actually really poor. Whoa, big twist. But one sliver of unpredictability doesn't excuse the rest of the 11 episodes being irredeemable wastes of cliche garbage. Sorry, I'm watching a lot of this shit. Kamigami no Asobi is a reverse harem anime, but all the guys in the harem are gods. That's the whole show. It's adapted from a game, apparently, and I don't know whether it was the game or the adaptation that made the character writing so bad. But full disclosure, I was never really fully tapped into this in the first place. I mean, it's just really not my thing, obviously. In the Land of Leodale is something I don't have much to say about. It's basic. It's more a slice of life than power fantasy, and honestly, you get the most enjoyment out of this show if you just put it on as background noise. The Aristocrat's otherworldly adventure, serving gods who go too far, is as generic as it gets. Nothing strikes me as unique here, but something that is uniquely bad is the show's pacing. In one episode in particular, a new villain is introduced, an exposition dump about the world is told to the audience, 2 new allies get introduced, we sit through an entire tragic backstory, and we even get a full training arc, all in 23 minutes. Bed and Breakfast for Spirits is about a girl who could always see spirits. Then she gets teleported to the hidden realm where her reverse harem is, obviously. But I feel like this anime ultimately never decides what to do with itself. I don't know, you could totally accuse me of bias because I'm not the biggest fan of this shit. Dog Days is about a kid who gets transported to this world where 2 kingdoms, the cat kingdom and the dog kingdom, are at war with each other. Although they're not actually at war. The war games are an entertainment spectacle held by the nations because they're in a boring peacetime. And that's a pretty interesting concept, but when your entire plot is set within this war, in air quotes, it feels unsuspenseful and boring. That even if an entire army is wiped out or a member of the royal family gets kidnapped, nothing matters because it's all a game. Didn't I say to make my powers average in the next world is an isekai mixed with something I can never understand or bother to try. Moe. This is the Moe isekai, and to be honest, I've never been a fan. Besides the moe, there lies a pretty generic isekai preset in this show. Like, you got the OP main character, the Magic Academy, and just nothing original to hold to its name. If you like moe, I guess you might like this show, but don't go into it expecting, you know, good writing or an interesting world. Villainess Level 99, I may be the hidden boss, but I'm not the demon lord, is a show where if you take away its gimmick, this basically sums up the rest of the show. My One-Hit Kill Sister is another addition to the family member isekai cinematic universe, with the mom isekai starting off everything. It has a pretty decent adaptation, it's just that the source material isn't all that special. This boy reincarnates into this generic game-like world with pretty average abilities. Then suddenly, when he was in a little pinch, his sister also reincarnates into the world, and she's the one that turns out to be OP. Crazy twist. And it turns out that she's a brother-loving deviant, and she literally killed herself to go to the same place that her brother did. You think that this might be a comedy, but it's actually not. Whenever it's funny, it's unintentional, and the story doesn't have anything insanely original to it besides its gimmick. The saint's magic power is omnipotent is a sleeper. The characters have less growth than the carrot, the main character's personality is as unique as white printing paper, and I really just couldn't care less about anything going on here at all. Parallel World Pharmacy is about a pharmacist who dies from overwork. Then in his new world, he starts a pharmacy of his own where he combines the world's magic with modern medical knowledge. Its writing seemed average, and the characters seem average, and the world seems generically average. There's just nothing really much to say here. Spirit Chronicles is something I remember so vividly. Fading in and out of consciousness, I'd frequently see the striking visage of Kirito. At times, I thought my mind had shut down, hallucinating that the show was buffering, but it was just how stiff the animation looks. This show isn't horrible, it's just not good or adds any value to this planet. Our protagonist is a reincarnated truck victim who starts out in the slums, but gets an audience with the king because he gets lucky in saving the princess of the kingdom. But then it turns into some generic Magic High School nonsense. Kuma 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 Bear is about a girl who plays this MMO, of course, and gets gifted a bear costume that gives her buff stats. Then when she puts it on, she finds out she can't log off. And now that she can't log off, what does she do? Nothing. She doesn't do anything. The plot is just a string of side quests for the whole show, and she's just wearing this costume for its entire duration. It's so silly. Problem children are coming from another world, aren't they? Has a pretty interesting premise. Basically, Little Garden is another world where gifted people participate in high-stakes games, and these 3 kids are transported here to take part. I mean, it is a very seemingly innovative idea, but ideas can't carry a series, because I feel like the world never gets even half developed, and the characters never change or go through any conflict. And the anime is so short with 10 episodes that the show doesn't even reach a satisfying conclusion. The reincarnation of the strongest exorcist in another world is just another ordinary power fantasy I've seen almost 100 times, but with a different coat of paint. For some, the exorcist spiritual style of fighting may be enough to sell this show for some, but not me. Tales of a Wedding Ring is about this guy who has a childhood friend that has always worn rings around her neck. Then that childhood friend turns out to be a princess from another world, then that guy follows her back and becomes the Ring King. Wow. And then he has to find other princesses with the other rings so he could collect them all. The trashiest harems have the plot literally revolve around the creation of one. Farming life in another world is another sleeper that is criminally boring. Shows about some dude who in his previous life had a terminal illness which restricted his movement. Then the god guy gives him another chance to choose how he lives in his next world, and dude just proclaims that he wants to live in a slice of life basically. He's granted the power to be the ultimate farmer, with the ability to spawn farming tools that make everything easy, slaves that never get exhausted to work on his plantation, and also a new body that he can move well in. And for the whole show he lives as he pleases. And good for him. I just don't care to watch him go through that journey. To be honest with you, anything that feels like a slice of life to me where it doesn't feel like anything is happening or getting accomplished is being put in mid-tier. Unless the show has some amazing vibes, I can't be bothered with this shit. Hack Sign is like if you booked a trip to Yapsville and decided to attend their Board of Ed meeting. Maybe I'm too brainwashed, maybe I can't comprehend this show, but to me it just seems like a lot of talking and no doing. Just a ton of pointless melodrama that doesn't really lead to anything. It's a typical trapped in an MMORPG show, but they're not really doing much. Fluffy Paradise is a feel-good isekai where the protagonist's ability in her new world is being liked by animals. And it's a pleasant watch, with you basically getting what you expected from the show. The only thing that's weird about the show is the fact that it doesn't even feel like an isekai. The main character, after she gets reincarnated, just acts like a normal 3-year-old, and she doesn't exactly do anything in terms of using her knowledge of Earth to make decisions or create some change. Kimo Michi is about a wrestler that has a perverted obsession with any type of animal, and he gets summoned, suplexes the princess, and goes around harassing beastmen. This is supposed to be a comedy, and it never made me laugh. I guess it's just not my type of thing. No shade if you find this funny. Fate Grand Order Absolute Demonic Front was, well, interesting. I don't play the game, although I've heard horror stories about people wiring their entire bank account to this game to fund their insatiable desire for a pink hair waifu version of Mozart. The show, though, is alright. It features some new characters and some returning characters like Gilgamesh, and they've traveled back in time to ancient Mesopotamia. Honestly, you can count this as an ignorance placement because I genuinely had no idea what was going on half the time. Like, I will literally be more awake listening to my high school history teacher glaze Thomas Jefferson than if someone tried to describe to me Fate lore. I made the executive decision to watch Fate Zero, then get the hell out of the whole franchise. Best decision I've ever made in my entire life. Reincarnated as a sword is just okay. It has a goofy gimmick and runs wild with it, although getting further and further into the series, it kind of just becomes unclear about what this show is actually about. The guy dies, finds out he's a sword, then flies around killing monsters, leveling up. Then a catgirl slave finds him and she uses him, and they embark on a journey going from side quest to side quest. All around, I think that the next show has a way funnier gimmick and slightly better execution. The Vending Machine Isekai. You knew it was coming. Possibly the greatest thought that any human held in their brain. Like, how do you think of this shit? A vending machine isekai. That shit's so fucking silly. Once you get past gawking at how fucking ridiculous and laughable this whole concept is, there isn't that much to this show to retain attention spans. The goofy gimmick this time is that the protag got reincarnated as a vending machine. So, what now? Well, I know, I can introduce a way for the vending machine to upgrade itself on the path to finally getting the max level udon noodles. See, the problem with this show is that it's built like it's trying to be some absurdist parody of isekai, or even just a simpler comedy. But one small problem. This shit isn't funny. intentionally at least. The characters aren't all that special, it isn't funny, and if you say this is a power fantasy, you're saying that with a smirk on your face. So I'm really just confused with this show on who it's even made for. Like with the terrible power fantasy shows, I know that there's at least an audience for that. But here, I feel like this would attract a lot of people because of how glaringly silly the title of this is. But most people probably watched maybe the first episode and dropped it right then and there. The Great Jahi Will Not Be Defeated is a reverse isekai that is basically just a flaccid devil as a part-timer. A demon lord or adjacent person gets teleported to the real world and has a hard time adjusting to modern culture. It's a genius setup with some great comedic potential, but this show is not funny, and it seems like its only redeeming quality is Jahi, who has a pretty cool character design. How to Not Summon a Demon Lord is some gooner shit. Don't deny it, you know it, I know it, we all know it. To be honest, the only reason it's not in the previous tier is because it's actually decently funny from time to time. This guy is a basement-dwelling loser who's allergic to showers, grass, the outside, and most importantly, women. But his antisocial gooner mindset is actually kinda entertaining to see when confronted with the bread and butter of isekai tropes. Because, you know, talking to women is required if you're gonna have a harem. It's a little bit refreshing to see the unsocial virgin NEET continue to be an unsocial virgin NEET, even if he's transported into another world. There's so many shows out there where the main character is a shut-in loser that immediately transforms into a dominant alpha male in a polyamorous relationship just because he changed environments. But don't get me wrong, the story is shit, the world building is shit, and it all culminates in being some lower mid garbage. Restaurant in Another World is one of many isekai that have to do with cooking or restaurants, and this one is pretty alright. Not gonna lie, I fell asleep multiple times watching this, but hey, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes that just means it's a vibe. This Japanese chef owns a restaurant in Japan, but they're closed on Saturdays, and that's because every Saturday the restaurant teleports to another world and opens up for foreign customers. Not much to say with this one. At least the owner pays his waiters an actual wage instead of making them dedicate their entire existence to the customer to beg for donations, tips. Campfire cooking in Another World with my absurd skill wastes no time. It practically speedruns the isekai meta. They skip any unnecessary stuff like, spending time with the protagonist before the isekai happens. But this is good. It hits all the dopamine receptors one by one without wasting any time. Instantly the gimmick is introduced. In a Shakespearean twist, our protagonist's special ability after coming to this fantasy world is online grocery shopping. Okay, now that I say that out loud, that's kind of funny. But nothing happens here that we haven't seen a million times before. Let's not spend any more time on this. Gate has one of the most striking premises on this list. It starts out with our protagonist as an off-duty military officer on his way to some otaku convention, because why wouldn't he be an otaku? So anyway, he's going on about his business when a portal to another world opens up in the middle of Tokyo, and a countless number of fantasy mobs in suits of armor flood into the streets. Eventually, the issue is dealt with and monsters stop flooding in, but the portal still remains. So the government decides to launch a widespread military expedition to plunge into this new world and observe the situation. Me personally, just from the description of this premise, I want to dive into the show headfirst and see what happens next. Although this series really disappointed me in the next couple of episodes, where the show kind of just loses focus and forgets what direction it wanted to take in the first place. The last thing I expected this seemingly military drama with a fantasy twist to become is a shameless harem which never actually answers the most important questions. Like why and how the monsters organized and invaded Japan through the gate. The Rising of the Shield Hero had some great concepts and a gripping premise, but the show immediately shat on every ounce of potential it had over the course of the first season. Instead of being the underdog shield hero, now the shield weapon can literally do everything the other weapons can do, but better. All the other heroes are cartoonishly evil villains that never change, and the Rising of the Shield Hero popularized the isekai trope of constructing the protagonist's harem through slavery. I think we're done with this segment. Guys, look at me. Are you okay? We are officially out of the trenches. This next tier is reserved for shows that I found to at least be enjoyable and above average. Alright, look. I know I might get crucified for starting out the tier like this, but first on the bright side of that tunnel is Isekai Quartet. Probably the most shameless cash grab of the isekai genre. It's basically a crossover series that features characters from Overlord, Konosuba, ReZero, and Saga of Tanya the Evil. I was planning on rating this way lower, but especially now that I've watched every single fucking show to ever come out in this genre, I know all of these characters and some of the jokes actually made me laugh. As a whole, I started to appreciate this show more from, doing this whole video. Chilling in another world with my level 2 super cheat powers is very similar to that one isekai in the lowest tier, Black Summoner. I don't know if you remember it. Honestly, it's shocking how similar it is. The guy is unreasonably overpowered. He literally comes equipped with a guide that just tells him what to do all the time. And this show has that strangely common trope in this genre where the main character fights some type of beast in the first episode and then they turn out to be some girl with a big chest. So if this anime is virtually the same as one of the worst ever in the genre, what separates them? It's the protagonist. He carries so hard, it's not even funny. He's the Martin Luther King of the isekai genre, a progressivist, a civil rights freedom fighter. I've liked him from the start of the first episode where he resisted discrimination against like some demi-humans, and then to the ultimate Chad alpha move where the guide literally told him to take a slave because it'd be more convenient and he defies her. Okay, now I'm saying that out loud, I think that this might be the bare minimum and isekai has just genuinely lowered my standards by that much, but whatever. I reincarnated as the 7th prince so I could take my time perfecting my magic ability is some fresh garbage that came from the spring season. It's about a person of low birth that dies and gets reincarnated as a highborn prince with exceptional magic. Yes, the protagonist doesn't actually start out on Earth. Their last life was in the same fantasy land they reincarnate into. So he's an OP protagonist that just hides its strength and blah blah blah, you already know. Although this show has some pretty cool characters, like the absolute magic fanatic main character who literally by episode 1 becomes Gojo when he smashes together the essence of two completely separate magic systems to tear the fabric of the universe. And then by episode 2 he just casually becomes Sukuna. The Familiar of Zero is a really old show, coming out in 2006, but it still had some pretty subversive ideas. Like the main character is actually not the one to get transported. Actually the one to do the isekai-ing is the main character. She lives in this Harry Potter type of fantasy world and she kinda sucks dick at every magic she does, but in the summoning course during the Hogwarts curriculum, she calls forth a guy. Just like a dude. Like everyone else is summoning spirits and pets, and then she's like, all right, let me just add a genre to the show. To be completely honest, I feel like this show doesn't have too much, substance to it. I'm really not the biggest fan of the whole Harry Potter vibe. Out of all the franchises out there, I don't mindlessly hate anything more than Harry Potter. Don't ask why. I don't know why. Shit's just the definition of corny to me. I don't know. But this show was pretty chill. Although it kind of just feels like a slice of life at certain times, but the characters were cool enough to keep it interesting. I'm the villainess, so I'm taming the final boss. Should have ended by episode 4. This story is about, well, you could just read the title. Person reincarnated into an otome game as the villainess and wants to tame the demon lord, but she ends up fulfilling the title of the show, taming the final boss, at episode 4. Then the rest of the show is kind of just filler, really disappointing, but I like the start. Magic Knight Rayhearth is probably the oldest show on this list, coming out in 1994. And I think it really suffers from the fact that I'm watching it in 2024 and not in 1994. Now, the way they portray everything feels at best stereotypical and at worst cliched. I'm also really not a fan of this old sort of art style. But I could say all that, but it's really not the show's fault. It was probably pretty good for its time. Mysterious Play is also a pretty old show, actually the second oldest one on this list. It came out in 1995, and compared to the other isekai in its era, including Magic Knight Rayhearth, it feels especially outdated. Here it feels like the cliched are cliched, and the art style and everything going on animation wise just wasn't my vibe at all. The story is pretty okay from what I watched from it, but it's also not anything to write home about. So Digimon is next, and to be completely honest, when I went to try to watch some episodes, I couldn't find the original anywhere online, not even on any of my alternative media platforms. But I sort of kind of remember watching Digimon as a wee young lad, and it's pretty much as classic as it gets. Kids get transported to another world filled with these creatures calling themselves Digimon, and for its whole runtime, they're mostly trying to find a way back to the old world. Kyokera Maul probably seemed like the most revolutionary out-of-the-box concept. If, and only if, you were watching this 2 decades ago. Yep, this is another old show, but it's an oldie that genuinely sounds like something you'd see come out in summer 2024. It's about this kid who gets reincarnated into fantasy, and because he has black eyes and black hair, he gets selected to be the land's demon lord. Okay, nowadays you definitely need a little more spice than that, because this premise is honestly vanilla to this genre right now. Although this came out before anything like this existed, and the show is pretty decent. All around, the story of the show is functional, it's not bad, and not the greatest either. It's alright. Working for God in a godless world starts out with the main character in a bucket, about to be drowned by his own dad. You see, his family are big into this mildly extreme cult that engages in human sacrificing. So he dies, obviously, then teleports to this other world where he doesn't get any extraordinary powers or skills, because magic doesn't even exist in this world, and even the concept of God doesn't exist. The village he lived in for a couple of years started to seem shady, and the people in the country's capital seemed even shadier. Apparently they live under an authoritarian government where dying for your country is normal, and I don't mean that as a soldier. They just ask you to kill yourself, and you have to, or else you get branded as an outcast, which all the villagers are apparently. It's a really cool concept with an enjoyable cast of characters. It's just that I feel like the execution was a little lackluster. It doesn't ruin the show though. The magical revolution of the reincarnated princess and the genius young lady is about a roughneck girl being reincarnated as a princess when she really has none of the learned mannerism or grace of one. She honestly carries the show with her flamboyant personality and willingness to think out of the box. She wasn't born with magic, so her goal is finding a way to fly without the use of magic. Pretty interesting show. Trapped in a dating sim, the world of ultimate games is tough for a mob is cool, I guess. This guy entered the contest of the silliest deaths of the genre. He binges a dating sim game for 36 hours, crashes out, then fucking dies. You can't make this shit up. So he gets transported into a world of this romance game, but the twist is that the gender roles in this world are flipped. Like, for example, he was supposed to have an arranged marriage to a woman that is 3 times his age and size, but he somehow escapes that fate. All around, it's a pretty interesting idea that is decently executed in a pretty fun time. Outbreak Company actually came out in the same year as Sword Art Online. This anime is about the Japanese government trying to build good relations with the fantasy country that they discovered a portal to. And their strategy of making the fantasy residents more welcoming to outsiders is to spread Japanese, more specifically otaku culture. And they found this bum to do it. The main character sort of reminds me of Subaru, how he's an otaku but not a creep. Although there are some scenes with this guy that honestly make me want to Roblox myself. Like the scene where he's granted an audience with the Empress.
She's a little girl! She's a little girl, she's a little girl, she's a little girl, she's a little girl!
Overall, this show has a pretty interesting concept, but it never goes anywhere crazy with this plot. Saving 80,000 gold in another world for my retirement is about a girl who finds out she has the ability to cross between worlds. So she does the only logical thing and starts bringing craft from Earth and reselling them in the fantasy, at a 10x upcharge of course. It's a fun show with some decently enjoyable characters and a serviceable story. Sweet Reincarnation is about a pastry chef who reincarnates into a land with no means of producing sugar. So he strives to become a lord where producing sugar in his land won't be a problem. I have an insane sweet tooth, so I could highly relate. I had a pretty decent time watching this. By the Grace of Gods is about a chill looking guy who gets reincarnated to a new world as a boy who lives by himself in the woods. You know when I say that the protagonist is wandering around aimlessly or the show has no direction? Yeah, this is basically the epitome of that criticism. Although what made it so bad in this case compared to the other shows in the lower tiers is that those other shows are trying to be plot driven. A show like this is kind of like the Stardew Valley of Isekai or Animal Crossing. It's the chill show with vibes. He gets reincarnated and lives secluded in the woods for a long time, with only slimes to his side. Then he gets discovered by some knights in the forest and he's reintroduced into society. The most heretical last boss queen from villainess to savior is actually a fairly well put together story about redemption. This isn't your typical villainess story. You know what? It's actually crazy how much of them there are out there, where the main character would be sucked into a dating sim or an ultimate game, and they'd have to take the position of the game's villainess, who usually bullies the protagonist in the game. Although in this show, the main character reincarnates into the body of an actually terrible person. Not like that cartoonishly evil bully that always engages in backhanded gossip, but someone who would literally trick someone who can't read into signing a slavery contract. When the main character gets a hold of her body, she instantly dedicates herself to apologizing and making amends for what she has done in her past life, and making sure the horrendous events that she knows happens in the future don't transpire. Life with an ordinary guy who reincarnates into a total fantasy knockout has a bombshell of a premise. So these guys are best friends. One who attracts all the girls but rejects all of them because he wants the attention of his friend, and the other who attracts no one and wants any female attention he could get. They reincarnate into a fantasy land with the quest of defeating the demon lord, but the twist is that the less attractive one turned into a girl, and they're cursed to find each other attractive until they defeat the demon lord. This show definitely has a great cast of characters that are fun to watch on screen, absolutely the main two guys, but at the end of the day, this is a comedy, and in that vein, it was just alright. Not laugh out loud funny, but enough to keep me around. I've been killing slimes for over 300 years and maxed out my level is a chill time. It's about a girl who unfortunately died by overworking, and now she reincarnates as an immortal witch who just takes it easy, only killing slimes for money to cover her cost of living. Then, at some point, she finds out after a tame 300 years of killing slimes every day that she's max level. This does kind of have slice of life vibes to it, and maybe a little comedy mixed into it, but I feel like the thing separating this show and say the farming isekai is that I could genuinely see people watching this and enjoying this one. I don't really know why, it's just a show that has so much more charm to it. Remonster is basically just the slime isekai ripped off, but this time it's especially bad. Like, the only difference I could think of when talking about the premise between Slime Isekai and this show is that in this show the main character is an orc, and in Slime, obviously, he's a slime. Otherwise, we have the same progression where he's just trying to build his own village, and he also gains the abilities of whatever he eats, which is just completely uninspired. But the time I spent watching this show was actually pretty enjoyable. I was initially going to make the argument that it's kind of hard to root for the main character because he's not really a great guy. Compared to one of the most likable main characters in the genre in my opinion, Rimuru, he fucking kills one of his villagers to just make a point. But actually, he's kind of a Chad. It gets tiring seeing main characters who have like 10 women willing to give up their life goals and virginity for them and have them moan and bitch around for 12 episodes. They never have the courage to turn them down or accept them. But here, well, the main character is definitely assertive. I'm in love with the villainess is exactly what it sounds like. It's a show where the main character gets reincarnated as a protagonist of a dating sim game, and then instead of the main cast of love interest guys, she falls for the villainess that bullies her. The show is actually really funny at times, with the main character having a borderline masochistic relationship with the villainess that I can only describe as a female anime fangirl's relationship with Levi from Attack on Titan. It's funny, although it does get old at certain points, especially later on. Handyman Saito in Another World is something I actually enjoyed. It's about a party of adventurers from the cleric fairy to the old wizard with dementia to the suit of armor who turns out to be a girl, and then to the thief of the group, who was a handyman in his previous life. It's a great party that was a joy to watch on screen. While the world is nothing to write home about, the best part about the show is the characters who develop a ton throughout the show. And finally, our main character has a position in the story that isn't the most important center of gravity. He's just a handyman that I actually respect 1,000 times more than any of the other usual cookie cutter otaku that hasn't worked a day in their life. Because Saito is genuinely using his skill that he had in his original world to survive in this one. He don't need no cheat skill or any bullshit like that. The wrong way to use healing magic is something I judged from before even watching it. I mean, with the absolutely fucking abominable reputation that healers have in anime, I wasn't very open-minded going into this. But as I watched and eventually finished episode 1, there was a part that convinced me that this was actually pretty good. It was the characters' reactions to being isekai that sold me on this show. This is one thing that I never understood when it came to shows in this genre, because this specific scene is a constant. Every single isekai needs a scene where the protagonist gets summoned to the fantasy world, because, how else would they get there? But most, if not all, of the scenes just feel unrealistic to me, personally. Conventional reactions range from confusion to familiar, from sadness to acceptance, and mind-bogglingly, one of the most common ones nowadays is from excited to happy. And that's a whole other can of worms that I don't feel like talking about right now. But to me at least, if I got summoned to another world with the people that summoned me right in front of my face, my first reaction would be anger. Like, you really interrupted me 80 attempts into Mesmer to force me to roleplay as some RPG loser for a decade? That shit's fucked up. And my boy had the same reaction. Well, actually, this isn't the main character. This is, who seems a little confused all around. And then there's her, who's fucking happy, of course. These three make a great trio, who have every single reaction and all ground each other in reality. And even if they're not together for a lot of the time, you could just tell when the author gives a fuck about their world, just from how the characters act. It may be generic, but it doesn't do anything wrong, and it has some pretty decent writing and enjoyable characters. Grimgar, Ashes, and Illusions is a pretty stunning show artistically. Its watercolor backgrounds and hazy aesthetic were enough to entice me. Although what really got me was how all the characters don't treat this world they reincarnated into as some game, but as some harsh new reality ravaged by monsters. Our main characters are not OP at all. Out of all of these reincarnated folk, a single goblin had them under dire straits. The show starts as a ton of people randomly wake up on some sort of stone monument, all retaining none of their memories from their past life. No guidance is offered, so they have to find out ways to survive, and they all agree to become adventurers. This show is special because it considers things that other isekai typically just gloss over. It's the most realistic isekai out there, and it's definitely more of a drama than a power fantasy. So if a power fantasy is what you're looking for, I'd obviously give this one a skip. Why Relena ended up at the Duke's mansion fairly surprised me. I go into a lot of these isekai with the female protagonist thinking it's gonna end up as a reverse harem, my greatest enemy. But this one is actually pretty cool. The main character knows that in this world, her fiance drugs, then ultimately kills her because she reincarnates as a character from a book she read. And Relena barely has any wiggle room when it comes to their marriage, since it's a politically arranged marriage between nobility. So she has to find a smart way to either dissolve the engagement or not be poisoned and killed. Another positive I'd have to give this show is how it portrays the nobility. Not to insult any other authors, but it seems like the one that did this did some actual research on how they act and the various complexities between the political relations families have. War on Geminar is an early 2010s series that really just feels like Isekai Code Geass. So this boy is transported to this world which is in the midst of a huge war. And at the heart of every country's military are these mechs that are usually only piloted by women, although our main character discovers he has a talent for piloting. War on Geminar is an example of a show that does the harem trope right. Every character's relationship with the main character is fully fleshed out, and it never seems like at any point that the girls are falling for the main character for no reason. He's a pretty cool guy. Japanese food from another world is the best in the vein of restaurant isekai. It really explores the entire Japanese palate, and this show has phenomenal fan service. The fan service being the food, of course. Just look at how fine this cuisine is looking right now. I'd eat that shit up. From someone who doesn't know a ton about Japanese food, I found myself sinking into the perspective of these medieval otherworlders who are blown away by everything served to them. This was a very fun time. Salad Bowl of Eccentrics is where we really start to talk about reverse isekai, since this is a great example of one. The 7th princess of the Holy Empire of Butt Cheeks flees persecution to a different world. Then she meets the protag dude and eventually crashes at his place. Although the princess isn't trying to get back to her world or ascend the throne because her kingdom is in ruins, so she doesn't strive to accomplish anything in the show. She's just a professional bum. Although the show is funny from time to time, but I feel like even the comedy shows need a sense of forward progression, unless it's like really, really funny. Which it isn't. It's close, but it isn't. The opening is the second coming of Christ though. Like, I don't believe someone sane could have come up with this. It's pure genius. The devil is a part-timer has a great start, gets a little exhausted mid-race, and absolutely falls flat on its face by the end of the race. The start of Devil is a Part-Timer is special. Not one comedy bit disappointed, not one punchline flatlined. The premise was cool and different for its time, and its potential was crazy. Then it turned to shit by like episode 3. So this show is probably the original reverse isekai as far as I know, and it's about the devil of a fantasy world getting isekai'd into the real world or Japan, and we follow their journey as they try to find the way back to the world while trying to make a living in Japan. Oh, and also the devil's working at McDonald's, so that's cool. This is some genius setup that just has way too much potential. Then it was like someone flipped a switch, and then the writing became dumb and stupid, and all of the characters became dumb and stupid, and the plot became dumb and stupid. And actually, you know what? I think the best way to prove my point is by asking if you knew that this show even had a season 2 or season 3. Well, yes, it does. And this is after the series fell flat on its face when it's trying to crawl to the finish line. The moment that the flip was switched was an episode in season 1, when the devil was asked why he decided to stay in Japan when he already has enough mana to go back to his previous world. And then the devil was basically like, I don't know, just for the plot, I guess. Eventually, in those later seasons, the writing becomes honestly childish, and it stops being a comedy and becomes a petty drama, to be honest. I don't see any adults liking this shit, but it makes this tier because of how good the start is. So, Sumiki Moonlit Fantasy is a show I've heard a lot of buzz about recently with its second season ending just a little bit ago, and I've never watched it until coming up with the masochistic idea for this video. And the word I would use to describe this anime would be charming. It definitely doesn't reinvent the wheel or really does anything that crazy. I mean, it genuinely just feels like the slimy isekai got reskinned and reposted. In the same way, our protagonist is pretty OP and has a busted level progression, but the main progression of the show is actually centered around the construction of this pocket dimension city. Most of my qualms from this show seriously just stem from the fact that whenever I watched this, all I could think about was I could just be watching the slimy isekai. And it's not even that the show commits some horrendous crime, except for the disgusting ass 3/4 pants. But it's kind of a brain-numbing, tame show that I was gonna say it needs Subway Surfers gameplay on the side, but to be completely honest, this is the side view brain rot content. How a realist hero rebuilt the kingdom is a story with a pretty decent concept. Instead of being reincarnated to save the kingdom on the battlefield, our protagonist is accomplishing that behind the successful management of the economy, using his knowledge of more modern societies. The show offers an angle we usually never see in isekai. On a real level, this show basically is just Civ 6, because our main character is practically just the ruler of the kingdom from the shadows. And it's really a joy to see him deal with and triumph over issues that literally span across the entire country. Sword Art Online needs no introduction. It has one of the strongest starts of any anime, which rivals other successful anime around the same era. My opinion on this show is not really unique or anything. The first half of the show is pretty good, in all honesty, although I haven't really watched this show in a while. I remember it being pretty good, other than the fact that Kirito can do nothing wrong and is clad in plot armor. Although the part when I knew that this shit was going way in the wrong direction is when they introduced that little fairy girl. And then Kirito and Asuna are immediately like, let's start a family. Like, bitch, what, aren't you like 17 years old? What's going on in this show? Then obviously the straw that broke the camel's back was the Aincrad arc, where Kirito's harem grows to include his 15-year-old sister. I was actually curious if Kirito was a minor attracted person who himself is not a minor. And to my surprise, this kid is 14 years old? Oh shit, the tables have turned. Oh shit. Dead Mountain Deathplay is a reverse isekai that involves a lot of twists and turns, with a lot of them I actually never expected. It's edgy, it's gory, it has some pretty decent writing, and honestly, I don't want to give away anything about this show because it's really easy to spoil. So I'll just leave it at that. And that ends off the shows that I'd consider to be just alright. But now we head into the show that I genuinely think, hands on the Bible, anyone could fuck with. These shows are just good. The Dungeon of Black Company has a protagonist who would unironically call himself an entrepreneur for buying like stink coin before it took off. He's a pretty wealthy dude and makes us kinda dislike him as he monologues about how he's a big time landlord and giggling about how he'd never have to work another day in his life. Then he gets transported into a more unforgiving world where grinding back to the top is less feasible. Although, as it turns out, through undeniable manipulation and a gross violation of labor laws, he fucking hypnotizes the poor souls basically into slavery. And he rises through to the top by being a deplorable human being. It's actually kind of funny, to be honest, and it's kind of more than just a comedy. I would say it's kind of, you know, a critique on capitalism and all that jazz. But all around, it was just entertaining as a whole. So I'm a Spider, So What is absolutely carried by the main character. She's a joy to watch on screen and is not a goon or loser who immediately knows that she's been isekai'd. I really like the contrast between the human classmates reincarnates and the Spider main character. And the progression with the main character's spider skills is a power fantasy done right. She doesn't go from level 1 to max in 2 episodes. It takes time. Honestly, the only thing keeping this back from being higher up is the CGI. They had to fuck it up, bruh. Drifters is insane. A number of historical Japanese people from the Edo period were reincarnated into a fantasy world. And I cannot lie, I've heard of like 0 of these historical figures. If their name isn't George Washington, then I don't know them. But it probably offers a more enhanced experience if you actually knew the references prior to watching. Because this premise is really cool. The style is really cool. Was something I noticed from literally frame 1 of this show. It's got a dark, gritty tone that I swear to God felt really familiar. So I looked it up and found out it was made by the same guy who made Housing. So now I'm hooked. Honestly, I could describe more of the plot and yap and fap about it, but honestly, if you like what you're seeing on screen right now, just give it a watch. As a reincarnated aristocrat, I'll use my appraisal skill to rise in this world. It is a pretty well executed Slime Sekai inspired work. I feel like there has been a recent influx of shows where the power scaling of the protagonist isn't the main sense of the progression, where the people the main character surrounds themselves with being more important than anything else. I mean, hell, Monster and this anime were airing simultaneously. And I'm not complaining about this rise of this specific trope, because to be completely frank, there are a million of different worse routes the isekai genre could have taken. So this isekai is about some dude that gets reincarnated into a body of the heir of a lordship of a small domain. And he was born with an appraisal skill, which allows him to see the underlying potential that each human has before him. And through this power, he pursues to create a strong domain with strong connections that'll be able to defend himself when an inevitable war breaks out. Basically, this is the networking isekai, and I think the best part about it is its characters, who are mostly just enjoyable to see on screen. Like this proud African American male who never lets himself down when everyone he is introduced to basically just calls him the N-word. He's my favorite. The Weakest Tamer began a journey to pick up trash is the best feel-good isekai. It centers around our main character who wasn't born with a god-gifted skill like everyone else in her village, so she was ostracized and even had a bounty put on her head. Throughout her quick-paced journey to the capital, she discovers a voice in her head that keeps interjecting during her daily life, which is revealed to be her past self from her original world. Even though this show is a little melancholic at times, it's truly a vibe, with a great adaptation overall and actually a really cool spin on the isekai concept. I really fuck with it. Although I would skip this if you're looking for more of an action show. The Faraway Paladin has a 6.8 on my anime list. To put this into perspective, normally the rating system out of 10 has 5 as its average. That's common knowledge, right? And whether it's above or below 5 determines whether it's above or below average. But on this site, it's more like they've bumped up that average by 2 points. So you could watch one of the best anime you've ever seen to see it has like a low 8 rating, and then watch the worst anime that you've ever had the dissatisfaction of watching, say like the smartphone isekai, and you find that its score is like a high 6. So whenever I see an anime with a score of below 7, I immediately have the thought in my back of my head that this could literally be the worst anime I ever watch. In this case, I headed in thinking I was getting served at the chum bucket, but I ended up getting a pretty nice meal. Will is a reincarnate who remembers little to nothing about his past life, but he wakes up to a family of monsters who raise Will as their own. All of them seem to have layers of secrets as to why undead are raising a human child. It's interesting to see how this strangely functional family interacts, as every single one of them, including Will, is keeping information from the rest of them. Then, as the story progresses and Will comes of age, it's satisfying to see the truth come to light as he sets forth on his own journey. My Next Life as the Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom, is about a girl who gets sucked into a romance game where the antagonist, or the villainess, is trying to steal all the yaoi boys from the main characters. Yes, this is the undisputed GOAT of villainess isekai. The writing and drama is actually very well done, and all of the characters have unspoken riz. This is one of the shows that I really wasn't expecting to enjoy so much, but it really surprised me. I can honestly see like almost anyone liking this show. Ascendance of a Bookworm is a really chill show with calm vibes. I'd actually say I associate it more with a shoujo kind of than an isekai. This show is about our main character Mine, the reincarnated librarian who comes into a poor family household in a world where owning books means you're incredibly rich. So she strives to make a world where books are more easily accessible. It's a cool show that, contrary to popular belief, doesn't need a specific pairing of chromosomes to like it. No Game No Life is fun. The art style from Madhouse is iconic, and the series is infamous for throwing your brain in for a loop. It's been a while since I watched it, and I rewatched it thinking I was only gonna watch a couple of episodes, but I ended up watching the whole thing again. It was really enjoyable, but the only thing that got me was the weird ass shit with the 12-year-old younger sister. Like, as a grown ass man, I have no tolerance for that. Just get it out, and the show will be like 100 times better. Also, according to my anime list, No Game No Life is the most popular isekai ever made, which is interesting. Does it deserve it? Obviously, I'd answer no, since this isn't even the highest tier, but it makes sense. It came out just at the right time, in a year where I literally couldn't name a single other show that came out in 2014. Isekai Ojisen, or the Uncle Isekai, is something I really enjoyed. At first, I thought it was just the continuation of the Mom Isekai cinematic universe, just rotating through different family members. But no, this is actually funny as hell. I feel like it's almost impossible to not have a good laugh watching this show. It's about a guy's uncle who gets hit by a truck and has been stuck in a coma for 17 years. But as it turns out, for all those 17 years, he's been living in an isekai, and he still retains a ton of his powers. So they make the obvious decision to start a YouTube channel and make that bag off of his uncle's powers. The nephew and uncle are a fucking hilarious duo. Like, the first thing that the uncle asks about after waking up from fucking 17-year coma is who won the fucking console war. The hero is overpowered but overly cautious is good. More gooder than I expected it to be. This has all the signs of a successful show. It has pretty good production with the GOAT Studio White Fox behind it. It has pretty much objectively funny bits and punchlines, and even if you know how every joke will play out because of the title, it still always gets you. You pretty much know what 100% of the jokes are gonna play out like, and that's completely fine. Expected humor can still be funny, and in this case, it is. Overlord is a show that, to me, on my first viewing, was the most okay, serviceable show that was definitely the isekai of all time. This is one of the Sword Art Online series of isekai where our main character puts on his VR gear, then suddenly finds out that he can grope the NPCs, but more importantly realizes that he can't log out of the game. Although there's not really a lot of stakes when it comes down to if you die in the game, you die in real life, because the main character starts out as the Overlord, an OP kingpin of the VR world. So I kind of found it to be a little dull in some places, although upon my rewatch, I finally got it. Overlord to me right now isn't different to other isekai in the slightest. But somehow its world, that's just the same type of MMORPG world as every other show, is so much more believable as a game world. And the villain persona that the main character Ainz plays up is always entertaining to see on screen. In all, the characters are great, the writing is good, and the animation is functional. Magical Shopping Arcade Abenobashi is a relatively old show that is about these two kids that get trapped in these alternate worlds themed by sci-fi, fantasy, and war. But every time they attempt to escape, they are pulled into another, weirder world. Although it's clear that every world is just a reflection of their hometown. It's just that each one takes up a whole new perspective on the town. This one has a crazy cool concept. I wouldn't recommend it to die-hard power fantasy fans, but for the real ones, y'all should hop on this. Tenko no Escaflowne was something I wasn't really looking forward to watching, because it's old. That's it. It's a me thing, not a you thing. I personally would rather watch a terrible modern isekai than just an okay old isekai. Just because these new shows are usually more brain rotted, and for the most part, the older shows, even if they're bad, still take themselves seriously. Although Escaflowne is pretty good. I came into this show actively dreading the experience, but I came out feeling pretty refreshed. Like, it's easy to forget how different isekai stories were usually told before the isekai boom. Instead of a power fantasy harem, this is a low fantasy epic with warring kingdoms and complex politics. And non-harem romance. The 12 Kingdoms is also a pretty old show, coming out back in 2002. The good old days. Just kidding, I wasn't even existing back then. It's a very interesting long-running epic where this random high school girl is visited by some mysterious blonde dude, then bam, she's a rightful heir to one of the 12 kingdoms in this fantasy world. The best part of this show is how descriptive it is with all the kingdoms' politics, economics, and even philosophies. It's very clear that the creator put a tremendous amount of effort into realizing this world that is fantastical, yet realistic. And in the same way as Escaflowne, it's always cool to see how isekai in this time period progress without the major precedents in the genre that we have today. Iruma-kun, Welcome to Demon School, is slept on. Maybe because the questionable budget or whatever limitations the studio working on this obviously had, or maybe it's, you know what, no, that's definitely the only reason the show is slept on. Because honestly, it's hilarious. Iruma-kun is a kid who can't say no to literally anything, so he's always being taken advantage of. Eventually it gets so bad that his parents literally sell his soul to a devil. But the demon that purchased his soul actually turns out to be a pretty cool guy who just wants a grandson. So then he gets taken to the demon world to attend the demon high school, where it turns out that his demon grandfather is the principal of said school. And also, Iruma is the only human in that school filled with demons who consider humans as an exquisite delicacy. It's extremely easy to see how something with the setup like this can make for some great laughs. Like Iruma having to sing the school anthem, which is literally about how humans' only purpose in this world is to serve as food for demon kind. Yes, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is an isekai. It's a dragon coming to Japan to live with her long-lost lesbian sisters. It sounds like an isekai to me. Regarding the actual quality of the show, I have but one word. Kyoto Animations. They just don't miss. I love everything that this studio touches, and Dragon Maid isn't an exception. I remember a while back there was some drama over the dub of the show, and I think there's some other drama. There's a lot of drama with the show. But I swear to God, people were making me believe that the SJW systematically infiltrated Kyoto HQ and injected their blasphemous rhetoric in the dub, when in actuality, it wasn't actually that bad. Was some of it cringe? Yeah. But it's not like it was completely out of left field. Like, I think they usually fit in the context of what they're talking about. My completely controversial opinion is that people care way too much about this shit. Log Horizon is a show that has always been hyped up by the geekier, low-key elitist in the community that would unironically use swine as an insult. And the show is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not like the best isekai of all time good. It's a Sword Art Online breed of show where blah 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 they get stuck in a game and can't log out. Although the difference between this and Sword Art Online is, well, actually almost everything. The main character isn't actually OP or anything in this show. He's just a smart dude that's always scheming behind the scenes, and I really fuck with that. A lot of these episodes are filled to the brim with dialogues about politics and the economy and shit, because instead of all the less important characters immediately manning the positions of side characters in the main cast going in to conquer dungeons and shit, the populace of Log Horizon wants to live in a society with rules. So if anything, I like that this show takes the approach where it technically isn't a power fantasy. But to explain why it falls into this tier and not any of the higher ones, I'd have to compare it to the anime in the higher tiers. And I just can't do that yet. Your boy Kong Ming is amazing. I've actually never heard of Kong Ming before. Apparently he was a famous tactician in ancient China and recently reincarnated into Japan to become the next Metro Boomin. Okay, not exactly. The show starts out with Kong Ming meeting this singer girl and they immediately hit it off. And then a couple hours of explaining things later, Kong Ming of the Chinese is gathering the Avengers to systematically dismantle Drake's career. But really, he becomes the manager for this lowbrow underground performer. And if that doesn't seem interesting enough, I feel like this show doesn't even need to try to be funny. From the fact that he literally thought he got sent straight down to hell because he spawned in on Halloween in the middle of Shibuya, to his job interview that he nailed because the employer thought his role playing was impeccable. It's truly a joy to watch right up until the end. The Saga of Tanya the Evil is one of the most inadvertently hilarious shows out there, simply because of the premise alone, which naturally produces just outright silly circumstances. So the plot of the show follows the story of a callous hiring manager at a large corporation that has a twisted personality. So his job to fit his personality was to fire people. Then karma came back full swing as one of the employees he fired pushed him on the train tracks. And as the train almost came to an impact, time stopped and he was visited by God. Basically, TLDR, our main character, is honest to God a Redditor atheist, and he says F you to the guy in the sky, and then God is like, suit yourself, and reincarnates born into the most fucked up, scarce, low fantasy world, plunged in war. And it's a fantasy because there's magic, but the world copies so much from Earth lore that it'd be more accurate to say that he's been reincarnated as a destitute orphan of Germany during World War II. And if your first thought is to think I'm exaggerating or like stretching the truth, literally just look at the map of this fantasy world. They're not even trying to hide it. So where this show becomes funny is that our guy reincarnates into the body of this tiny little girl, and she decides to enlist into the military to make it out of her dire straits. And this 9-year-old girl climbs the rank of this fascist militaristic meritocracy, and you'll have some scenes where this child, who should be slurping on one of those colorful swirly lollipops, will be calling new recruits worthless scum maggots, and then giving speeches on how they need to honor their fatherland by slaughtering their enemies and making fortresses out of their bodies. Like, this shit will never not make me laugh. Otherwise, I gotta give this show props for being one of the most unique in the genre. It's a great isekai, but it's also a pretty well-crafted military drama. This is one I'd give a watch if you've already seen all the shows in the higher tiers. It's only 12 episodes, so it's a rather quick watch. Now and then, here and there practically represents the exact opposite of the only thing the isekai in the lower tiers accomplish: escapism. This show has an optimistic, naive protagonist who's dragged into a world that's riddled with scarcity. It's a winded, dark land with red skies where the scant humans that are still around fight wars with each other over the little water left on the planet. It's a bleak, older look at the isekai genre that is not just dark for dark's sake. We'd call that edgy. But this anime has substance, also which will be clear to anyone who reaches that ending. The only reason I didn't put this on the next tier is actually because of the name of that tier, since this would not be something I would actively recommend to everyone. Sunny Boy is an isekai, I guess? Well, look, I'm not complaining at all. Now I get the chance to talk about it. I suppose the isekai tag sort of comes from the premise that mysteriously an entire high school just finds itself adrift in a void-like dimension with no communication to the outside world and no way out. Also mysteriously, certain students gain superpowers which range from folding the very flaps of reality to telekinesis. So this show is about the pure chaos and drama that would naturally spawn from these absurd circumstances, like the power struggle of the conventionally portrayed governing body in Japanese media. The fucking student council. One of my personal favorite things about this show is its masterful cinematography. And I don't use that word much to describe anime because it's not like there's a camera. But this show has great perspective and genuinely just amazing direction as a whole. I mean, it makes sense. It's directed by Shingo Natsume, who was responsible for gifting the world with One Punch Man Season 1. So yes, I would actively recommend this. Hey, quick question. Does anyone remember Angel Beats? I remember watching this when I was like 10 years old, and it was one of my favorite coveted anime back then. So naturally, I went into it expecting it to be some gooner fan service piece of irredeemable filth. Although it seemed like I had some pretty good taste back then. This anime is honestly one of a kind, a true classic in its truest sense. The show is about a band of teenagers and also Otonashi who recently comes to this world that he is told is the afterlife. All of the kids in this world join together in opposition against a mysterious angel sent by God, apparently. A ton of people that come here, including Otonashi, have amnesia, and throughout the show their memories start slipping back into consciousness, with truly industry-leading scriptwriting and production for its time, and still even today, Angel Beats aged like fine wine. And if you haven't ever had the pleasure of watching, I definitely would. I recognize that the show has flaws, but it's so emotionally brilliant and technically exceptional in so many different areas that I tend to look at the show and say, what flaws? Slime is good. I like it a lot. It definitely follows the same bulimic tropes that all the shittiest shits follow, like the main character getting way too OP way too quickly. But that brings me to why I placed this show here, because this is my pick for the best shitty isekai. And by shitty isekai, I just mean a traditional isekai that came out in the last decade that markets itself with a gimmick. Although the gimmick of Slime Sekai just happened to spawn a brilliant trope that go on to inspire an entire generation of isekai. The trademark of that time I got reincarnated as a slime is that the show is only sort of a power fantasy. And I say that because the main sense of progression comes from Rimuru building up his country and making sure his civilians are safe. The problem with a lot of bad isekai is that when your main character is an omniscient god by episode 3, how will there be any real conflict going forward? And Slime Sekai answers that with the simple fact that being overpowered doesn't mean you're instantly a good political leader. Season 2 has a ton of just talking. Sure, there are a ton of covert CIA Diablos assassinations, but a lot of the season has just been spent with Rimuru trying to form relations with other countries and maintaining his safe position. Personally, I'm loving it. The boy in the harem is amazing. It has expressiveness that really is just a Ghibli phenomenon. Immediately as I saw this in theater, it rose to the upper echelon of Ghibli movies in my opinion. This bird is creepy but cool, the other world is insane but fun, and the movie wears what it's trying to communicate on its sleeve, but it still communicates it in a way that I've never seen before. So then, if this is up in the tiers compared to other Ghibli movies, then by default, it's in the upper echelon when you compare it to these. Honestly, I don't even want to give anything away. I'm just gonna say it's Ghibli, and look at these cute little bird guys. Watch it, I swear it's good. Just watch it, please watch it. So I'm actually not gonna lie with this next one. The placement between this show and one that you're gonna see higher up was especially tough for me. It's honestly the fact that I made this video and watched so much of this shit that tipped the favor away from Eminence and Shadow. If I were to sell this show to someone, imagine a show about your fantasies as a middle schooler. To be some mysterious omnipotent edgelord who's genuinely an entity beyond everyone else's comprehension. But those fantasies are now reality. Once Sid gets isekai to another world, his true aspirations of becoming an untouchable Sigma male becomes fully realized. I'm not even gonna lie, I went into his isekai not knowing that it was supposed to be comedic. I thought the main character was genuinely just a psychopathic murder hobo who loves to roleplay. But then when Sid founded his organization, Shadow Garden, and their group motto was, "We who lurk in the shadow to hunt the shadow," I knew they were fucking with us. One of my favorite scenes in this show is the Excalibur one. If you know, you know. That's all I could say. All Around is one of my favorite comedy shows, not just in the genre, but also just within anime as a whole. I love recreators. Do you ever just get one of those $1 million ideas that just appear in your head while you're like taking a shower or maybe eating? This has that $1 million idea concept, and it drives it home with some absolutely fantastic execution and writing, and it also has a GOAT adaptation. But despite all of this, it's mind-bogglingly underrated. Well, actually, I feel like the people who have actually watched this rate it well, but it's just that not as many people have seen this show as I would expect. It's ranked like 1,600 in popularity, when it should crack at least the top 100. So therefore, I'm putting it high on this list so more people would check it out. But of course, it also deserves to be here. So let me just get on with my pitch. Recreators is a reverse isekai story for all intents and purposes, but everyone who gets teleported from their world to ours is a character from a majorly popular anime, manga, or video game. And to all those transported, this is the land of the gods, where they could literally find the one responsible for creating them. So as confusion and chaos ensue for the teleported and everyone else, the one that mysteriously had a hand in this incident won't tell anyone why she did it, and we follow our main character as they try to figure out why this happened to them, and how they could return to their old world. I feel like this is the type of innovation we need in this genre to resurrect it after it's been abused and used like a fleshlight for almost a decade. Okay. Now, on to the GOATs. Konosuba is the first in the lineup, to the surprise of probably no one. Usually when an isekai tries to be meta or funny, they absolutely shit the bed. But Konosuba, especially to the guy that actually just fucking watched every single isekai ever, is funny as fuck. This crew creates for a genius comedic dynamic that is literally just funny whenever they're around each other. Kazuya calling Aqua a slutface for the 400th time will never get old. The bit where Darkness valiantly defends her comrades like the knight that she is, only to reveal she rushed into the front lines to feel the pleasure from some octopus hentai monster, will always crack me up. And then Megumin's daily urge to just rub one explosive magic out for the day is just priceless. I actually need to watch the newest season right now. I was actually waiting for all the episodes to come out, but now I have no excuse. You know what I'll be doing after this video goes live. Spirited Away is an isekai. I mean, of course it is. While you probably won't hear, oh, Spirited Away is my favorite isekai, it's undeniable that it technically is one. Even the title makes it obvious. So yeah, classic among classics. This would be where I wiggle my finger in the air and say actually Princess Mononoke is better, which is true but not relevant. This shit's too fire to be an isekai. So Spirited Away is just the pinnacle of Ghibli animation. No background left empty and every space feels lived in. I feel like when people think of Spirited Away, they don't really think of the plot or anything that really goes on in the movie. I think we as a collective just associate this movie with its vibes. Spirited Away is absolutely a watch based around feeling. Like sure, you could pick apart every single detail and make your own conclusions about everything, but at the end of the day, what will stick with you is how you felt in the moment, the atmosphere, the mood. And I think this movie is truly one of a kind for that. I'm sure this next pick is probably more obvious than if I told you America is a nation that could be defined by a simple word.
I was going to put him.
But of course, Mushoku Tensei is required to sit at the top of the genre. It absolutely had an undeniable influence on. All of those mid to low tier isekais saw what Mushoku Tensei was able to accomplish, but they tried to emulate it without adding any of the substance that made this show so special. This show is expertly written, between the small household dramas of Buena Village to one of the greatest adventure tales in anime. But more than anything else, this show is really just the ultimate isekai. Unlike a lot of low tiers, it utilizes the isekai premise in a way that is less like a crutch and more like a vehicle for characterization. Rudeus unlearns his past disgusting behavior and just changes so much in general because of his new environment. Like season 2 was fucking wild. At first I was lukewarm with it. I was like, what has this show come to when we're getting the erectile dysfunction arc? But now that the season is finished with the second core also out, it might have just given us the most extreme character development we've ever seen. Rudeus genuinely goes from a one-night stand beta cuck to a fully realized grown alpha Chad with 2 wives and a child. Also, I've never been one to engage much with the waifu discourse, and I honestly feel kinda icky for even just saying that, but this show unlocked something within me. Fuck Rem, fuck whatever seasonal girls that everyone hypes up, Sylphie on top, I will die on this hill. It is true, Mushoku Tensei is the ultimate isekai. It creates the tropes that so many other shows abuse, but the best isekai story, in my opinion, goes to ReZero. ReZero can't be the ultimate isekai because it's so unlike any other isekai. Where most isekai act as an escapist fantasy for its audience, ReZero is not. Subaru is your typical weeb who gets transported to an idealized fantasy world, but then you see the plot and get hit with the sudden realization that you're not supposed to self-insert into Subaru. And you shouldn't idolize this world because it's kind of fucked up in a lot of places. Subaru is one of my favorite protagonists ever. And I guess that's actually a hot take because I was showing my girlfriend ReZero and she actually stopped watching it because she found Subaru to be such an insufferable douche in the middle part of season 1. And yeah, honestly, she's not wrong. A lot of the shit that he does around this part of the story is just straight up asshole behavior. But what I did that she didn't was look at it from his perspective. Subaru is a guy who has died in some of the most psychologically and physically horrifying ways. Not even getting injured or traumatized, fucking dying. If you could go through everything Subaru went through and still be a fully mentally stable, non-selfish good Samaritan, you must just be built different. Although most of us, including Subaru, aren't. And by season 2, Subaru still ends up being an incredibly likable character. The writing, from the huge cast of characters to all the mindfucky return by death situations, is impeccable. I kid you not when I say that you'll appreciate this show more and more the more you rewatch it. I've rewatched it like 2 times and might go for a third in preparation for season 3. And I'm sure my third time around, I will pick up even more things I missed on my second rewatch. While Mushoku Tensei is the best isekai in the truest sense of the word, ReZero is the greatest story that just happens to be an isekai, if that makes any sense. Wow, we're actually done. About 200 isekai or so watched and ranked. If you watched until the end, put it on in the background, or even just skipped here, thank you so much for tuning in. I would appreciate it if you subbed and also had a nice rest of your day. This one took a lot of effort. So I'm going to sleep. See ya.